Have you ever stopped to consider that perhaps it's not you who choose your path, but invisible forces acting within you? Most people believe they make free decisions, but in reality, they live imprisoned by silent archetypes that shape choices, relationships, and even failures. Carl Jung called this the collective unconscious, an invisible field that writes stories behind our backs while we believe we're in control. The controversy is this: you're not as free as you imagine. The ego creates the illusion of independence, but it's the archetypes that decide where you stumble, who you love, and even what you fear. And here's the counterintuitive truth. What you think of as a flaw may just be the shadow of an unrecognized archetype. And what you call fate may just be a repetitive pattern from which you've never freed yourself. It's like playing a game without knowing the rules, always losing without understanding why. But here's the good news. When you identify the archetypes that guide your soul, you discover a secret map that's been right in front of you all along. And this map not only explains your deepest pains, it also reveals your forgotten mission. Throughout this video, you'll learn to recognize these 12 archetypes, see how they reflect your wounds, and most importantly, discover how to use them without becoming a slave to them. After all, your soul doesn't want you to live as a character, but as the protagonist of your own story. Imagine walking into a room full of mirrors, but none of them shows just your face. In each reflection, a scene from the past appears. An unresolved pain, a lost smile, a silence that was never explained. This is exactly how archetypes work according to Carl Jung. Like invisible mirrors that, without you realizing it, project forgotten wounds into your current life. A practical example? The person who always seeks acceptance everywhere may be unconsciously reflecting the rejection they felt in childhood. This behavior is not conscious, but it shapes choices, friendships, relationships, and even the way they view their own spirituality. The fascinating thing is that these mirrors not only reveal wounds, but also opportunities. It's as if each image projected by the archetype is a chance to do shadow work, bringing to the surface what was hidden so that it can finally be integrated. And the curious thing is that the more we try to escape these images, the stronger they become, as if the mirrors were calling us to face head-on what we've avoided for years. These subtle reflections can manifest in the most common situations. Think about the person who always needs to be the funniest one in the room. Could they be trying to hide the pain of never being taken seriously at home? Or that co-worker who assumes the role of hero in everything, but deep down deeply fears abandonment. Carl Jung showed that the ego and the persona act as filters for these mirrors, creating social masks so that the wound is not seen. But the archetype, being something greater than the individual, insists on reflecting. When you study spirituality, you realize there's no escape. Sooner or later, the symbols will reveal what's behind the scenes. It's like watching a play where the characters don't know they're acting, but the audience, the unconscious, already knows the script by heart. These repetitive patterns are signs that there are wounds demanding recognition, and shadow work becomes the lens capable of seeing the true reflection. The most interesting part is that these invisible mirrors don't appear to punish, but to guide. They function as silent compasses, indicating the directions where the soul needs attention. Who hasn't noticed that certain archetypes seem to haunt them? Like the archetype of the caregiver, which makes someone give themselves to the extreme and forget themselves, or the archetype of the sage, which can be used as a shield to avoid feeling deep emotions. All of this shows that archetypes are not just collective images, but also personal codes that carry scars. By recognizing them, one can transform what seemed like destiny into a conscious choice. The secret is not to deny the reflection, but to embrace it as part of the journey. And perhaps the most provocative thing is realizing that what you avoid looking at is precisely the seed of the next calling that will surface. Because archetypes never appear by chance, and what they hide today may be the key to what you are destined to experience tomorrow. The mask and the seed. The archetype is not who you are, but who you hide from an early age. We learn to wear masks. It's how the ego creates a persona to survive in a world full of expectations. But in the process, we forget that the mask isn't our true face. It's merely a social disguise. Carl Jung explained that the persona is useful. It helps us coexist in society, secure jobs, and maintain relationships. But behind it lies a seed, a latent archetype that doesn't disappear just because it's been silenced. Imagine someone who wears the mask of always strong. They appear firm, unshakable, but deep down they hide a fragility that was never embraced. Or the mask of always cheerful, smiling to everyone, but carrying a silent emptiness within. These hidden archetypes don't cease to exist. They simply await their moment to manifest, like buried seeds that sprout when the earth cracks. And how do you discover this seed? Simply observe what bothers you most about yourself and others. Often, irritation with someone is merely a reflection of what's hidden in their shadow. Someone who harshly criticizes arrogant people may actually be denying their own need for self-affirmation. This is the delicate task of shadow work, peeling back the layers of the persona to find the original archetype that pulses within the soul. It's like opening an old box stored in the attic. You may hesitate to look, but what's there is an essential part of who you are. Spirituality teaches that denying the seed is living a borrowed life, playing roles that have nothing to do with your essence. The challenge is precisely having the courage to remove the mask without fear of what will be revealed, knowing that what was hidden is more true than what was shown. When you understand that the archetype is not the mask, but the hidden seed, everything changes. You realize you no longer need to sustain roles that are tiring, meaningless, or merely pleasing. The true archetype may even seem strange at first, because it often contradicts what you believed yourself to be. An example. Someone who has always presented themselves as a leader may discover that their seed is that of the healer, not the hero. This doesn't diminish their strength, it simply redirects their energy. Another example, someone who has always been the good girl may discover that within them lives the warrior archetype, who needs to learn to set limits. The beauty of this discovery is that when the mask falls, the seed sprouts naturally, and this sprouting opens an even deeper calling, the recognition that life is not about sustaining characters, but about listening to the silence of what has been rejected, and that this calling, sooner or later, arrives. The silent call, how the active archetype reveals its refused mission. There's a call that doesn't scream, doesn't knock loudly, but insists on whispering when you're trying to sleep. Carl Jung said that when an archetype activates, it doesn't ask permission. It begins to organize coincidences, situations, and even encounters that seem like chance, but aren't. This is the silent call of the soul. You may even try to ignore it, telling yourself that it's just an impression or that it's not the time, but life insists on placing the same lessons in your path until you listen. It's like that person who always wanted to write but hides in administrative jobs until books by favorite authors start popping up on every corner, or someone gives them a blank notebook as if it were a reminder straight from the unconscious. The active archetype acts this way, showing you a rejected mission, something you avoid, but which insists on being reborn because it's already part of who you are. The curious thing is that this calling rarely comes in an obvious way. It reveals itself in symptoms of dissatisfaction, in the emptiness after achievements, in the feeling of being in the wrong place, even when everything seems to be going right. It's the hero who works in an office, but feels like he's living someone else's life. It's the healer who remains silent in meetings, but becomes ill when she denies her vocation to care. Spirituality shows that the ego creates perfect justifications to silence this calling. I don't have time. I need to be responsible. This is nonsense. But in silence, the soul continues to demand it. And the more it is denied, the heavier the calling becomes, transforming into anxiety, frustration, or even illness. Therefore, recognizing when an archetype is active is vital. It's not something you invented, but something that already exists, knocking on the door of consciousness. A good practical exercise is to write down everything that insists on appearing in your life, even when you try to escape it. Repetitive dreams, intersecting conversations, interests that return out of nowhere. For example, if you constantly dream about travel, map symbols, or roads, you may be receiving the call of the explorer archetype. If symbols of healing, medicine, or people asking for help appear frequently, perhaps the healer is trying to emerge. This mapping is part of shadow work, identifying what the unconscious insists on revealing and naming the active archetype. It's not about creating a purpose. It's about recognizing the mission that is already pulsating silently. The most intriguing thing is realizing that when you accept this call, life begins to align almost magical situations, as if the universe responded immediately. And this awakening opens the doors to understanding the great hidden trinity that governs the inner theater of all of us. Hidden trinity, ego, shadow, and soul in archetypal theater. Within each person lies a secret stage, and on it three forces perform daily: the ego, the shadow, and the soul. Carl Jung showed that the ego is like the main actor, always wanting to be in the spotlight, controlling every word and gesture. But what the ego forgets is that there are characters hidden behind the curtains, ready to take on roles it prefers to deny. The shadow is the cast the ego doesn't hire, but which insists on appearing in dreams, unexpected reactions, and emotional outbursts. The soul, on the other hand, is the silent director, the one who doesn't appear on stage but guides the entire play. This triangle creates a kind of archetypal theater in which archetypes emerge and disappear, shaping behaviors, choices, and even the accidents that change the course of life. Spirituality reminds us that this stage isn't chaotic, it's intentional. Each character, even the most uncomfortable, fulfills a function in the larger narrative. The ego, for example, is essential for maintaining order and identity, but it can become tyrannical when it believes it controls everything. The shadow, on the other hand, carries forgotten potential and unintegrated wounds, functioning like a gold mine hidden beneath the earth. Many reject the shadow because it frightens, but it is within it that talents, strengths, and truths the ego refuses to acknowledge are found. Think of someone who gets irritated whenever they see bold people. Perhaps what bothers them isn't the other person, but their own repressed boldness. The soul, unlike these two forces, doesn't care about masks or disputes. It is the invisible thread that connects all archetypes, reminding us that every role has value, even when it seems uncomfortable. Ignoring the soul is to live trapped in the struggle between ego and shadow. Listening to it is to allow the theater to become learning, not just drama. To perceive this trinity in action, simply observe your daily life. When you explode with anger without understanding why, it's the shadow taking over the voice the ego wanted to censor. When you insist on maintaining an image of perfection, it's the ego trying to maintain control of the narrative. And when, amidst the chaos, a clear intuition emerges that points to an unexpected path, it's the soul blowing the script. Wisdom lies in not trying to silence any of these voices, but allowing each to be heard at the right time. A simple practice is to write daily as if giving voice to these three parts. What would my ego say today? What is my shadow trying to show? What is my soul silently asking me? This exercise opens space for the inner theater to become conscious. And when this happens, life takes on another dimension, because you stop living as a spectator and begin to embody the myth that has always been within you. The myth incarnate, living archetypes without becoming a character. Each archetype carries the power of a myth. The hero, the mother, the sage, the lover, all are living images that span cultures and centuries. Carl Jung said that these symbols are not human inventions, but expressions of the collective unconscious. The risk lies in becoming confused with them, as if your identity were reduced to a fixed role. This is when the hero becomes a prisoner of the need to save everyone, forgetting themselves, or when the caregiver believes they only exist if they are sacrificing themselves for others. Living an archetype doesn't mean becoming a character, but allowing its energy to permeate you as inspiration, not as a prison. It's like an actor who plays a role, but knows that at the end of the play, they can take off the costume and return to being who they are. The challenge of spirituality is precisely this: to embody the myth without getting lost in it, learning to use symbols as compasses, not chains. In practice, this requires presence and awareness. Ask yourself, am I acting like the lover because I choose to, or because I'm afraid of not being loved? Am I living the warrior archetype to defend my values or to hide my fragility? These questions help you understand whether the archetype is being freely embodied or whether it's dominating your narrative. A good example is observing public figures. How many leaders have fallen because they believed they were unattainable gods, forgetting that the king archetype also carries the shadow of tyranny. Or artists who immerse themselves so deeply in the creator archetype that they lost themselves in addictions and obsessions. The archetype is a lens, not the entire identity. This is where shadow work becomes crucial. When you illuminate the excesses, you discover how to balance the myth within yourself rather than letting it engulf you. A practical way to live the myth without becoming a character is to create entry and exit rituals. If you need the warrior archetype to face challenges at work, use concrete symbols to activate it. A song that inspires courage, a physical gesture, even an outfit that symbolizes strength. But when you return home, perform another ritual to deactivate this energy. It could be taking a mindful bath, writing down your emotions, or even meditating. This helps the ego avoid becoming too attached to the paper. It's like reminding yourself every day that you are greater than any archetype. And it's in this space of awareness that something profound happens. You begin to see that there's a central code guiding all myths, a kind of invisible thread that points to the core of the soul. This thread is the next step, the secret map that shows where the central archetype of your journey lies. Soul codes. Identifying the central archetype of your journey. Each person carries within them a central archetype, as if it were an invisible code written in the soul. Carl Jung described it as the force that organizes experiences, choices, and even seemingly casual encounters. This central archetype isn't chosen rationally. It's revealed through recurring patterns. Consider, for example, someone who, since childhood, has always been called upon to mediate conflicts, listen to friends, and offer advice. Even without realizing it, this person already expressed the energy of the wise man or the healer. Another example, someone who from an early age dreamed of travel, adventure, and discovery, and who, even when trying to live conventionally, feels life is becoming colorless. This person likely carries the explorer archetype as a guiding thread. These codes don't lie, they repeat themselves at different stages of life, as if the soul insists on remembering the true path. Identifying them is like discovering the secret compass that has always been in your hands, but which the ego, distracted by masks and expectations, never stopped to use. But how can you clearly identify this central archetype? The first clue lies in the stories that move you most. Notice which movies, books, or myths consistently make you cry or give you goosebumps. If narratives of kings and kingdoms resonate deeply, perhaps the ruler archetype is active. If stories of spiritual masters or seekers of the beyond spark your imagination, it could be the mystic archetype. Another way is to analyze your dreams. They are full of symbols that point to the predominant energy. A dreamer who constantly sees themselves traveling, climbing mountains, or crossing seas likely has the explorer as their guide. Someone who dreams of caring for children, plants, or animals may be revealing the strength of the caregiver. Shadow work also helps in this process, as the central archetype is often hidden behind what has been denied. Spirituality teaches that it is not necessary to invent a purpose, but rather to reveal the one that has always pulsed within the soul. A powerful practice is to write your own timeline, listing the most significant moments in your life. Ask yourself, what energy was present in each phase? You may notice that even in different situations, the same pattern repeats itself. This exercise works like deciphering a personal puzzle, and when you recognize the central archetype, everything begins to make sense. Professional choices, emotional pain, even the most intense relationships. Someone who discovers they carry the creator archetype, for example, understands why they never adapted to repetitive work. Those who recognize the presence of the lover archetype understand why their greatest pain has always been linked to rejection. Identifying this code isn't about imprisoning yourself, but about liberating yourself. It's about consciously using this energy to align life and soul. And when this alignment happens, something curious emerges. You realize that your archetypes don't live alone. They dialogue, fight, and even go to war, sabotaging or propelling your inner journey. Archetypes at war, when internal forces sabotage your path. Within each human being, there is not just one archetype, but an entire army. The problem arises when these forces, instead of supporting each other, begin to war with one another. Carl Jung said that when the ego loses balance, one archetype can attempt to dominate the others, creating devastating internal conflicts. Consider someone torn between the lover and explorer archetypes. On one side, the desire for total surrender in a relationship. On the other, the yearning for freedom and adventure. This battle can paralyze decisions, generate guilt, and even destroy important bonds. Another example, the caregiver who at the same time carries the warrior. They want to protect and embrace, but they also need to set limits and fight for themselves. If they don't learn to mediate, they end up exhausted, trapped in endless dilemmas. These internal clashes show that the archetypal war doesn't take place externally, but in the silence of the psyche, where shadow work is the only bridge to reconciliation. These internal wars often manifest in practical life as procrastination, self-sabotage, or contradictory choices. Who hasn't decided to change their life and, the next day, felt an internal break, as if something were pulling them back? It's the inner ruler trying to organize and control, while the explorer calls for chaos and risk. Spirituality shows that there is no wrong archetype. What exists is imbalance. When one archetype dominates without dialogue, it steals the spotlight and prevents the others from acting. It's like a soccer team where everyone wants to be the attacker. Without defense, the game is lost. Therefore, recognizing these conflicts is essential. When you realize that your procrastination isn't laziness, but a war between archetypes, everything changes. Instead of blaming yourself, you begin to listen. Which part of me is crying out for attention right now? This simple act of listening diffuses internal battles. A practical exercise is to give voice to each archetype in conflict. Take a piece of paper and write as if you were each of them. What does my warrior want? What does my lover fear? What does my ruler demand? When you read aloud, you'll realize that these are not enemies, but forces with different needs. Just like in a tribal council, the ego's role is to listen to all voices and find the balance. This practice doesn't eliminate war, but it transforms conflict into dialogue. And little by little, you realize that each archetype has something to teach. The explorer shows courage, the caregiver reveals compassion, the wise man brings discernment. When war becomes counsel, life gains clarity. And it is at this point that reconnection rituals emerge, capable of transforming internal battles into conscious alliances, allowing archetypal energy to be used as a guide rather than a prison. Reconnection rituals, how to embody the archetype consciously. It's not enough to identify an archetype, it must be consciously given space. Carl Jung reminded us that archetypes are living forces, not theoretical concepts, and need to be embodied through real experiences. This is where reconnection rituals come in, practices that build bridges between mind, body, and soul. These rituals don't need to be religious, but symbolic, charged with intention. If someone feels the presence of the warrior archetype, they can create the habit of starting the day with physical exercise or martial arts as a way to channel their strength in a healthy way. Those who perceive the sage archetype within themselves can adopt a morning reading ritual, studying works that expand consciousness, from philosophy to spirituality. The bottom line is, each archetype needs a ritual space to manifest itself without dominating one's entire life. Without rituals, energy becomes loose and chaotic. With rituals, it organizes and becomes an ally. Rituals also serve as reminders to keep the ego from confusing itself with the archetype. If you need the energy of an explorer, for example, you can create the habit of walking in new places every weekend, even if they're different streets in your neighborhood. It's a simple gesture, but it nourishes the essence of the archetype. If you feel the call of the creator, you can set aside a few minutes a day to write, draw, or create something by hand. These small gestures act as activation codes, bringing the right energy at the right time. Shadow work can also be transformed into a ritual, writing letters to forgotten parts of yourself, meditating before symbols that awaken memories, or even lighting a candle as a symbol of inner enlightenment. Spirituality shows that when the archetype finds a ritualistic channel, it harmonizes rather than generates conflict. It's like giving the stage to the character at the right moment in the play. Consciously embodying archetypes means living with intention, rather than letting internal energies take over. A ritual doesn't have to be complex. It can be a simple glass of water sipped slowly, recalling the archetype of the caregiver asking for self-care. Or a silent prayer that awakens the archetype of the mystic. The essential thing is that these rituals are consistent and charged with presence. Over time, you realize that you're not just doing practices, but cultivating a living dialogue with your unconscious. This dialogue strengthens you in the face of internal wars and external pressures, making your life less reactive and more aligned with the self. And in this process, a powerful revelation emerges. Behind every archetype lies a wound crying out for healing. Reconnection is not just about living symbols, but about going through the journey of the wounded hero who discovers their true strength precisely in what they once tried to deny. The wounded hero's journey, healing through the denied archetype. Every hero carries a wound, and it is precisely this wound that makes them human. Carl Jung reminded us that the hero archetype isn't born ready. It emerges from suffering. Those who have been rejected learn to seek belonging. Those who have been betrayed learn to fight for truth. Those who have been abandoned discover the strength of self-sufficiency. Interestingly, the denied archetype, the one you reject most, is often the deepest portal of healing. A person who spends their life running away from the warrior archetype, for example, may carry traumas of aggression and violence. But precisely by integrating this energy, they learn to set boundaries and protect themselves. Someone who rejects the lover archetype may carry wounds linked to affection, but only by allowing vulnerability can they heal the emptiness of their soul. It is through this journey that the wounded hero ceases to be a victim of their pain and begins to master it. This healing doesn't happen abstractly, but concretely. When a person decides to confront the denied archetype, they expose themselves to situations they previously avoided. It's the caregiver who finally learns to say no without guilt. It's the ruler who relinquishes control and discovers they can also trust. It's the wise man who, instead of hiding in books, allows himself to feel raw and imperfect emotions. This process is painful because it directly confronts the ego, which insists on maintaining the familiar character. But it is precisely in this confrontation that transformation emerges. Spirituality shows that there is no awakening without traversing the shadow. Every hero myth includes a descent into the underworld before rebirth, and in practical life, this translates into moments of crisis, ruptures, and loss. What appears to be failure is, in fact, the rite of passage that makes room for true healing. A powerful practice is to revisit the oldest pain and ask, which archetype did I deny here? If it was the fear of showing power, perhaps the warrior was rejected. If it was the difficulty trusting love, perhaps the lover was buried. This shadow work exercise isn't comfortable, but it builds bridges between the wound and the archetype that can heal it. By recognizing and integrating this energy, the wound ceases to be just pain and becomes a source of wisdom. The wounded hero doesn't need to erase their scars. They learn to use them as a map. And it is precisely at this point that the greatest mystery appears, realizing that archetypes are not fixed destinations, but temporary maps. They point the way, but they cannot replace the freedom of the soul. Healing through the denied archetype opens the door to the ultimate revelation, using archetypes without being attached to them, transforming the map into a living mystery. From map to mystery, using archetypes without getting stuck in them. Archetypes function like maps. They offer direction, show psychic territories, and help you understand where you are on your journey. But Carl Jung always warned that confusing the map with the territory is a dangerous mistake. The archetype is a symbolic reference, not a prison. Spirituality shows us that when someone clings too tightly to an archetype, they end up limiting their own expansion. It's the explorer who lives only seeking new things, but never delves deeply into anything. It's the wise man who gets lost in theories, but avoids real experiences. The archetype can point the way, but it can't replace the mystery of the soul, which is always greater than any symbol. When you understand this, you begin to use archetypes as tools, not as fixed identities. It's like having a map in your hand, but still allowing yourself to get lost in the streets of an unfamiliar city, trusting that life also knows how to guide you. In practice, using the map without being tied to it means being open to the unexpected. You may identify with the healer archetype, but that doesn't prevent you from eventually experiencing the warrior energy. You may recognize yourself as a lover, but at a certain stage in life, you will be called upon to be a ruler. The problem arises when the ego clings to a definition and refuses to move on. The result is stagnation. Shadow work helps here, as it reveals how much this attachment hides a fear of change. How many times does someone say, "I'm just like this," without realizing they're stuck in a crystallized archetype? The truth is that the soul is movement, not a label. Archetypes are maps to guide, but the mystery of life demands flexibility. It is in this dance between symbol and freedom that human beings find true individuation, living what needs to be lived without being imprisoned by anything. A good practice is to alternate between awareness and surrender. Use archetypes as guides to understand yourself. Read about them, recognize their signs, create rituals. But at the same time, allow life to surprise you. If you've always recognized yourself as an explorer, practice living the creator's energy for a month. Write, paint, invent something new. If you've always seen yourself as a warrior, experience a period of silence and contemplation, cultivating the mystical. This flexibility breaks internal prisons and reminds you that you are not the map, but the traveler who carries it. The archetype shows routes, but mystery is the living, unpredictable road where the soul truly finds itself. And it is precisely at this point that the archetypal journey opens to something greater, realizing that, more than following symbols, you are discovering your own soul's path, one that no book fully describes and that can only be revealed through direct experience. Now that you've embarked on this journey through archetypes, the inevitable question is, what will you do with this knowledge? Because understanding the symbols without applying them is like having a precious map tucked away in a drawer. It leads nowhere. Carl Jung said that looking within is dangerous because it requires courage to confront the ego, the persona, and the shadow. But that's precisely where the key to transformation lies. Think, what archetypes have you recognized in your life? What patterns have trapped you without you realizing it? And most importantly, what denied archetype might be hiding the healing you so desperately seek? These questions don't have ready-made answers, but they're designed to poke at your soul so you don't go back to living on autopilot. If something within you has awakened, don't let it die here. Apply it. Observe your symbols. Do your shadow work. Create small rituals to connect with your soul. And most importantly, share in the comments which archetype spoke to you most today, because sometimes writing is the first step toward liberation. And remember, if you want to continue exploring the depths of the unconscious, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any future dives into this journey. The path of the soul cannot be traveled alone, and here you'll always have company on this quest.